The valley was so quiet that morning you could hear the crunch of my boots echoing off the frozen ground, the sort of hush that makes you forget the world even exists, right up until it's ripped to shreds by something you never expected to see. That's how it started for me. I looked up, and right there, on my empty hillside, was a full-blown snow resort. Not just a couple of sheds, no, but ski lifts swaying in the wind, and a 50-foot banner with Karen's smirking face plastered on it, announcing her grand opening like she was the Queen of Winter herself. You know what I mean? I'd never seen anything so nuts in my life. That was the hook, and believe me, it only got weirder. Before I even had time to wrap my head around how a woman I barely knew had built an entire winter wonderland on land I just bought here, come the HOA board members marching up in their puffiest jackets, cheering like they'd just won the lottery. Their celebration didn't last long. Sirens cut through the air, that deep county sheriff wail that makes your heart sink even when you haven't done a thing wrong. The sheriff stepped out of his truck, holding a document thick enough to make a judge sweat, and announced to the whole crowd that not only was the resort built smack in the middle of my property, but every single structure, every pipe, every cable, every ticket booth, every last snow cannon was now legally mine because none of it had a permit. You could hear jaws hit the ice. That my friend was just the start of a story so bizarre it almost feels made up. But it's real. And it unraveled the entire HOA, left Karen, who'd never known mercy, suddenly begging for it like she was the victim. I can still smell that crisp morning air, see the clouds hanging low, remember the shock in everyone's faces. Let me back up a sec, though, tell you how I got there. I just bought that stretch of hillside outside the HOA, a spot I thought would give me peace, keep me clear of the rule-crazy neighbors and their committee meetings about mailbox height and grass color. It was remote, snowed in half the year, but that suited me fine. I figured I'd build a cabin come spring, finally have my little patch of quiet. What I didn't know was that one woman from the HOA, Karen McClintock, had other plans. Plans made of pure entitlement and the sort of wild imagination only people who've never been told no seem to develop. Karen was infamous around here. Blonde hair so stiff it could stop a snowstorm, voice sharp enough to crack the ice on the lake, and a personality that could make a pine tree wilt. She ran the HOA with an iron fist, a laminated rule book and a clipboard that was practically an extension of her arm. And apparently she'd decided my hillside belonged to her, or at least to her idea of community improvement. I didn't even know her, but she had picked my land as her next canvas. I first saw it 2 weeks after buying the place. I drove up with a thermos of coffee thinking I'd mark out where I wanted my cabin. Instead, what I found nearly knocked me off my feet, bulldozers tearing through the snow. Workers in neon vests running around steel beams flying through the air. Snow machines blasting fake flakes like someone had dropped a Christmas theme park right onto my peace and quiet. I stood there mouth open trying to figure out if I'd driven to the wrong property. When I finally caught the eye of one worker, he just pointed to an icy platform where Karen stood, dressed like some winter dictator in a white fur coat and sunglasses the size of dinner plates. Before I could say a word, she blew a whistle, no joke, like a gym teacher from hell, and yelled that civilians weren't allowed on site. On my own land, I shouted back, waving my deed, but she just clapped her hands and announced that since my land was adjacent to the HOA, it fell under her jurisdiction. I told her that's not how property law works. She told me laws were flexible if you had vision. She kept talking about the biggest snow resort the county had ever seen. Tubing tracks, ice gardens, some grand glacia plaza. I demanded she stop, but she just waved her clipboard and declared she had approval from everyone that mattered, which of course did not include me. That night I drove straight to the county office, explained the whole circus to the clerk. She laughed so hard she had to take her glasses off, pulled up the map, and confirmed what I already knew: my land, my deed, no way around it. One call led to another, and the sheriff promised he'd meet me at the site the next morning. I barely slept. Maybe Karen would back down, maybe the HOA would step in, maybe this would end quietly. Nope. By sunrise, that construction zone had turned into a winter festival. Flags lined the road, music pumped out of snowdrifts, kids screamed down the tubing hill, vendors handed out cocoa. And right in the middle of it all, Karen cut a giant ribbon with news cameras filming every smile. I tried shouting, but she called security on me, the owner. The crowd gasped like I was some villain. Then came the sheriff, striding through the snow documents in hand. Karen looked relieved, thinking he was there to toss me out. But when he read aloud that the entire resort was built illegally on private land, my land without a single permit, you could see the color drain right out of her face. She tried to argue, screamed about community rights, but the sheriff shut her down with a single line: "Everything illegally built here now belongs to the landowner." The crowd stared at me like I'd sprouted antlers. Even the snow machines went quiet. I suddenly owned a multi-million-dollar resort I'd never asked for. Karen, to her credit, didn't give up. She screamed, lunged for the paperwork, but the sheriff warned her that another outburst would land her in a cell, colder than the snow. The board scattered. The workers powered down the lifts. The party died. I stood there stunned, holding the world's weirdest windfall. The sheriff pulled me aside, told me owning the place meant inheriting Karen's mess. Unpaid contractors, building violations, safety risks. He said to brace myself for the fallout. But something in me snapped awake right then. This land was mine, the resort was mine, and for once Karen couldn't twist the rules to steal it back. Of course she tried anyway. Soon as the sheriff walked away, she came stomping over, jabbed her finger at my chest, called me every name in the book, swore she'd sue me, threatened to ruin my life. I told her that suing me would mean admitting in court that she'd built a resort illegally on someone else's land. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just spun around and stormed off the board, trailing behind her like ducklings headed for a frozen pond. That afternoon, I walked the resort, tried to figure out what I'd inherited. Ski lifts humming half-built plazas, concession stands ordered off the internet at 2 a.m. Ice swans lined up like guards, all expensive, all thrown together in a rush. One contractor caught up with me, clipboard shaking in his hands, worried about unpaid bills and work done on credit. Apparently, Karen had promised HOA funds she didn't have. That debt wasn't mine, but I told him I'd try to sort things out. When I got home, I couldn't help but laugh. I'd bought a quiet patch of land for solitude and wound up with the set of a low-budget Bond movie, built by a woman who thought laws were suggestions. Still, the idea of a winter resort didn't sound bad. If I could salvage it, maybe turn a profit, maybe do some good. Next morning, Karen was back pacing the snow like a caged wolf. She demanded I give her the resort. I reminded her you can't own something you built on someone else's land. She tried every angle: community, necessity, annexation, even threatened to have the HOA vote to take the property. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The board looked ready to mutiny. I started meeting with contractors and inspectors. They told me stories how Karen cut corners, ignored safety warnings, banned brakes, rewired machines herself. The inspector said the lifts needed reinforcement, the tubing track was dangerous, the Glacia Plaza was a death trap. Karen tagged along, shouting that everyone was exaggerating. The inspector ignored her, wrote his notes, told me most of it could be saved if I put in the work. Good news, I guess. Then things got weird. Karen submitted a fraudulent annexation proposal to the county, fake maps, made-up quotes, even forged signatures. The county planning office laughed it out of the building, but I realized she wasn't just stubborn. She was desperate. When strange things started happening at the resort, snow cannons, sabotaged lights, mysteriously out, equipment jammed, I knew it was her. One night I caught her in the maintenance shed, wrench in hand, trying to inspect a live panel. I stopped her before she got hurt, told her it was over, but she just glared and said, "You think you've won, but you don't know what I put into this place." The way she said it gave me chills, colder than the snow. So I started searching, found a hatch hidden behind the Glacia Plaza. Dug it out and found an underground chamber packed with industrial snow machines and a cryogenic coolant generator straight out of a sci-fi lab. It was all wired up to the resort designed to create artificial snowstorms on command. Karen hadn't just wanted a resort. She was trying to engineer the weather. It was dangerous, illegal, and completely nuts. I called the sheriff. He brought in the county and eventually the feds. That's when Karen really cracked. She showed up screaming at the workers, at the sheriff, at me, insisting she'd built something revolutionary, that we were small-minded, that none of us understood her vision. When the sheriff started listing her crimes, illegal construction endangerment fraud, she broke down screaming about how she was never respected, how this was her chance to matter. Then she dropped the real bomb. She'd already started phase 2. Before I could figure out what that meant, I found another hidden hatch, this one under a snowbank on the far hill. I tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside, humming with mechanical energy. Suddenly, the whole hill started shaking. The ground split. The hatch burst open, and a massive cryogenic tank rose from the snow, bigger, meaner, connected to pipes that could freeze half the county. Karen was there, blueprint in hand, eyes wild and broken. She said she'd wanted a blizzard no one would forget. The machine fired up, shooting a blast of freezing vapor across the hill, sending workers fleeing. I ran with the sheriff to try to shut it down, but the main switch jammed, and the machine only got louder. In the chaos, Karen confessed she'd tapped into a geothermal pocket beneath the hill, believing it would power the machine forever, but it made things unstable. The only way to shut it down was by releasing the pressure valves in the chamber below. The hatch was half open. Someone had to go down there. The sheriff wanted me to do it, said Karen wasn't fit, and he was right. I slid down into the freezing chamber, twisting valves as ice built up on my gloves. Karen, stubborn as ever, broke free from the sheriff and followed me down, saying I'd never reach the final valve in time. Together, teeth chattering, we cranked the last wheel, venting the coolant just before the system hit redline. We crawled out half frozen, met by deputies and paramedics. Karen was finally done empty, shivering quietly, apologizing, no more fight left in her. The officials told me the danger was over for now, but dismantling the machines would take weeks, maybe longer. The blueprints hinted there might be even more hidden structures. The sheriff said Karen was facing serious charges, maybe even jail, maybe treatment if the judge had any mercy. I believe she needed both. That night I walked the snowy hill, found a line of fresh survey markers stretching toward the trees. Karen's final act, phase 3. Even with her gone, her madness lingered, buried beneath the snow. And here's the thing, justice didn't look like a courtroom victory or a parade. It looked like standing alone at dusk, listening to the wind swirl across land I nearly lost to someone's obsession. It looked like knowing the fight isn't really over, that there are always more secrets waiting beneath the surface. And sometimes the ones who cause the most damage are those who just wanted to matter. So let me ask you, was what happened justice or just survival? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, where do you draw the line between vision and madness? And what would you have done if you'd found a buried empire beneath your own land? I want to hear your stories. Because in the end, the real battle isn't just against people like Karen. It's about holding on to what matters and making sure no one gets to rewrite the rules of your life without a fight.